Well, hey you guys, here I am once again for another Tomes of Terror. Now, obviously, over on the Flickers of Fear thing, I've been covering some kind of Halloween themed movies, obviously, because Halloween is coming up. So I figured I might as well throw in a Halloween book as well, just to kind of even things out. So I looked through my Kindle Unlimited subscription. They had a bunch of free options available, including a bunch of holiday themed Halloween anthologies. So I just kind of picked one of those at random. Now, this isn't really technically an anthology. It's called The Halloween Store and Other All Hallows Eve Stories. And it was published in 2020. And like I said, it's not so much an anthology, it's like a collection of Halloween themed short stories by a single author who is named Ronald Kelly. So this whole book is like pretty short, clocks in about 140-ish pages, at least in the ebook version, and it has 7 stories in it, as well as kind of a brief introduction, and then there's an essay about the author's Halloween experiences as a kid, and then like his list of his favorite Halloween things from his childhood, like in the 60s and 70s. So most of the stories in this were good to great. The essay and list portions gave me a very, very slightly boomery, get off my lawn kind of energy. You know what I mean? But it was kind of fun, like, hearing about Halloween's past and the details that he brought up, a lot of the stuff that he brought up. Like, I mostly remember that too. I'm not, I'm a little bit younger than he is, but I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so a lot of that stuff was kind of still around, so I could relate to a lot of stuff that he was talking about in the essay. So the first story, which is what the book is named after, is called The Halloween Store, obviously. And it reads a little bit like a Goosebumps style, like YA kind of story. But that's nothing really against its quality, which is it's actually quite entertaining. It's a little bit predictable, like you can pretty much see where it's going to go, like from the first couple pages. But, like I said, it's still a fun story. So it's about a group of 3 kids who go to this mysterious Halloween store, like in a strip mall. It's kind of like a low rent, like Spirit Halloween. And it looks pretty standard. Like it's got kind of all your cheap jack, like Halloween kind of stuff. Like I said, like a Spirit Halloween would have. But it does have in the back, like an excellent vintage section. So the person that runs it is this very enigmatic kind of lady. And the kids end up picking out these very special, like old school kind of costumes, like the ones that came in the boxes, like with the plastic window in the front. Like if you're old like me, you'll remember those. So they pick those out, and those costumes turn out to have a little something extra going on, which I won't spoil. So the second story is called Mr. Mac is Back in Town. This is actually the one, because I actually read this book probably like a week and a half ago, and I think this is the one that I remembered the least, but it was still kind of a fun read. These were all like a fun read, but like I remembered some of them more than others, like as time went on. So this story is about a man named Kyle, and his daughter Rebecca went missing, like her and her friend Hannah went missing. Now, Rebecca is later found injured, but still alive. Hannah is still nowhere to be found, however. And then details about Rebecca's disappearance start coming out. Because like I said, she's still alive. So when she's in the hospital, like she's talking about what happened to her. And Kyle realizes, her dad, that he might be dealing with kind of like a monster from his own childhood that sort of disguises itself as a person in this big camper full of horror memorabilia. Like he goes different places and lures kids in there with like all this cool Halloween stuff, and so he realizes he's gonna have to like battle this monster again. So it's like a generational monster story kind of. And the third story is called Blood Suede Shoes, and I liked this one a lot because it had kind of like an urban legend vibe to it. So it's about this kind of chubby, like wallflowery Bobby Soxer girl named Ruby. And she's walking home after this big outdoor Halloween rock concert. I'm presuming, I don't think it's specified, but I was presuming this took place in like the late 50s or early 60s, at least like the way that it was laid out. So while she's walking along this lonely road at night, she gets picked up by her idol, Rockabilly Reb, in his crimson Cadillac. Now, she had just seen him perform at this festival that she was at, and she is super jacked to meet him in person because she's like his biggest fan or whatever. And he turns out like he's really nice, and he lays on the charm and tells her how beautiful she is, which she's kind of like, really? Not, I don't think so, but you know what I mean? So you can see it's like getting kind of fishy, but like she kind of falls for it anyways. And As the ride goes on, though, things get decidedly devilish, I guess, you want to put it that way. Because Ruby starts to find out maybe the sacrifices that her hero has had to make for fame. So the fourth story, which actually I think is the shortest one, is called Clown Treats. And it's pretty gruesome, pretty impactful. But once it's set up, again, you can pretty much see where it's going. But that's okay, like I said. So it's a group of kids, and they're trick-or-treating. And they make a stop, like the last stop of the night, at the house of their favorite teacher, whose name is Mrs. Abernathy. And she doesn't seem to be home, but her husband is. And he's like sitting there in the living room, like dressed like a creepy clown. And it's pretty clear as the interaction goes on that something pretty terrible happened like not too long before the kids showed up, which again, I won't spoil. So the fifth story is called The Cistern. And it's another one that was pretty good, but it was another one that didn't leave like much of a lasting impression. I think it was the one that I remembered the second least, you know what I mean? So it's about this man named Judd, and he feels compelled for some reason to return to the small town where he grew up, which is called Jackson Ridge, Tennessee. And when he gets there, it all looks pretty much the same as he remembered. And it turns out that they're still holding their annual Halloween festival, which he really liked when he was growing up. So while he's looking around the town, he meets this little boy who very, very badly wants Judd to take him to the festival because presumably like his parents won't take him or something. At least that's the story that he tells. But it turns out, as the situation goes on, that neither the little boy nor the town are what they seem to be. Now, the sixth story is the best by a long shot. And I read like a lot of reviews of this, and pretty universally, like this was most people's favorite story. It's easily the most gory and the most fucked up, which goes a long way toward, saying why it was my favorite. So this story is called Pretty Little Lanterns, and it's set in 1928. And it establishes pretty much from the jump that there's a serial killer in this little town who murders several people every Halloween and leaves their heads like carved out like jack-o'-lanterns, like with candles in them and everything like that, which is a great visual. So the sheriff of the town, like Sheriff Townsend, he's just tired of this whole business, and he just wishes it would all go away because they can't catch this guy. And then there's this other character who's like the librarian, and she's like kind of the town busybody, and her name is Gladys. And she is absolutely certain that she knows who the culprit is, and she comes to the sheriff like with this, what sounds like a cockamamie theory. But as the story goes on, she's a lot more correct than you might think. So again, as it goes on, like we discover that there's a link to one of the most famous killers of all time, like in real life. And there's some very, very grisly scenarios in this, including the killing and horrible mutilation of children, which is something you don't see in a lot of horror stories. So I know this is going to sound fucked up to say, but it's like I always kind of appreciate it when an author actually has the balls to go there, because a lot of movies and books won't. So I always I didn't expect it. Like in this one, I was just like, holy shit, he went there. All right, I appreciate that. So, but this was the best story, like hands down. So the last fictional story in the book is called The Amazing and Totally Awesome Fright Creature, and it has an exclamation point at the end. And it's about two boys who find an ad for the title creature in this really old comic book. And on a lark, they decide they're going to order one, even though they're like, this company probably still is in business. Because this is like their dad's comic book or something like that, or their granddad's even. It's really old. So they decide to order one, and this goes about as well as you would expect. Again, it's kind of predictable, like where it's going to go. It's not, there's no surprises or anything, but it's still like really good. I will say that this would be like the first time in history that any of those comic book ads were absolutely completely correct and accurate in what they were selling you. Like they said that that's what it was, and that's what it was. That's how it turned out. So this was also a good story. It's a bit more on the YA end, kind of like the first one was. Although there's still like a lot of gore in it, so it's not really YA, but it just kind of reads that kind of vibe, even though it's like pretty gory. So like I said, the essay and the list sections are also a lot of fun. They really do kind of conjure up some of that old school Halloween magic that some of us remember, like from our younger days. If you grew up in the 60s or 70s, it will probably resonate with you a lot harder You know what I mean? I said, it did kind of give like a little bit. It wasn't too much like this, but I did kind of feel like a little bit of a boomery, oh man, shit's not as good as it was back in the old days and all that other kind of stuff, which always kind of turns me off a little bit. But it didn't go too far in that direction. And like I said, I do remember most of the stuff that he was talking about, because even though he's a bit older than me, the author, you know, I grew up in the 70s, so a lot of that stuff was still like a holdover. So it was like kind of cool to read about that and be like, oh yeah, I remember that, or I remember that, those kind of costumes or whatever. So yeah, I mean, all in all, this is a really solid collection. It's very, very Halloween focused, like from front to back. So it's kind of a great choice if you want to get into that mood of the season, you know, and not have something that's like super, super long. I think like last year when I reviewed some Halloween anthologies that were kind of by, I think I did like one by different authors and one by the same author. And some of the stories were just like barely Halloween adjacent, but this one is like very, very Halloween. Like every single story is like set on Halloween or around Halloween or is about Halloween somehow. So I think that's really good, because if you're going to do a Halloween story, like if it's going to be the theme, like I kind of feel like you should stick to the theme, you know what I'm saying? And this is a very much like old school 60s 70s Halloween thing. So if that's your vibe, then you will probably really, really dig this. So that will do it for this Tomes of Terror. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember, like, share, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. And I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.